What's up, YouTube? I'm Trent McCare. Welcome to the Lean to Left podcast, season 1, episode 4, podcast where I and future guests talk about local and national politics in an effort to drive the conversation in a way in which I believe helps 99% of Americans through progressive policies and platforms. Sorry, running late today. Unfortunately, it is like 25 degrees here in Texas, and our infrastructure is not built for that. So my internet was down. Hopefully it's back up and stays up through this stream. Right now I show an excellent connection. Hopefully it stays that way. We're going to jump right into some quickie news. Get out of the way before we dive into some deeper topics. We had Biden flying out to Delaware to watch the Super Bowl last weekend. I honestly think that's a bad decision. I don't understand why, as president of the United States, you were not being the voice, the leader, really the example, right? It's your first 100 days. You're 20 days into it. You couldn't wait. I mean, you have, excuses. We were going to get the rest of our furniture, blah, blah, blah. But you literally have an entire just army of individuals who could have gone and done that for you, live streaming. I just don't get it, right? I mean, it's just like Gavin Newsom going to a restaurant. You're the leader. You're the example. I don't understand how you end up in a situation where you're in that position. So I think it's bad on Biden. I can go out and do things like it's just, but I'm not the president, right? So I just don't get it, right? It's, I just went and helped the neighbor with his recliner as I was running my dog yesterday, as I was wrapping up, bringing him some furniture to his house. He really wanted to shake my hand. I was like, no, thank you. No, thank you. And then he still tried. He thought it was because his hand was dirty, greasy. I was like, no, I'm really just trying to be cautious. Like, you're 70 years old, blah, blah, blah. And, but even with all that, I'm not the president, right? Like, Joe Biden, you're the president. You got to do better. You got the COVID relief package. I think this is going through on reconciliation. I think the real question is whether or not the $15 minimum wage will make it through with the package. That's kind of up to the oldest member, basically the longest standing member of the Senate, though there is a chance that Kamala Harris can overturn it as vice president. So we'll see. The other thing that's being discussed is lowering the cap for who would get the full payment. I think it's absolutely ridiculous, right? They're talking about lowering it from $75,000 to $50,000 as an individual, basically double that for couples. I think that that's a ridiculous thing to do, right? You're talking about the gap between 50 and 75 is not that much money. You're talking about my mother, basically a single teacher living at home. Why are we trying to not give them a check? And then the other thing is that unemployment is way higher than it was in 2019, right? People who were making $15-$20 an hour with their previous job, with my previous job, right? Hourly employees who have now been laid off, they don't get checks because their 2019 income was too high. That's absolutely insane. So I think this entire discussion about putting some sort of cap is ridiculous if you can't means test it in a way that doesn't catch people like my mother and a bunch of employees that I care about, right? We have 3 major protests happening right now around the world. We have one in Myanmar where the military committed a coup basically about a week ago. They're promising to hold an election in 1 year. The U.S. government, Joe Biden, has declared this a coup. I think that it's pretty interesting to see this because Myanmar is a situation where you've had coups throughout their history, at least in the last couple of decades, but you really had a 10-year period of nothing. So now you have 20-year-olds who are in college, just graduating college, right, or whatever in Myanmar, and they've never understood the rule under military, right? So they're not comfortable with it. They're not accepting of it. So I think that young people in Myanmar may really step up and enact some change. In India, we have protests occurring led by the farmers. These have been going on for a little while. There's tens of millions of farmers in India. It's not like America where you have just giant megacorp farms. That's actually what India is the Indian farmers are trying to avoid. India is trying to nudge them the other direction, basically, to get away from subsistence farming, 5-acre farms. So the protest isn't changed to regulations and the possible removal of guaranteed prices for crops. I think that, this one is going to be really interesting to follow. It's been a long time since India has had a protest of this scale. Their president is really popular, so protests like this are rare. In Russia, you have another popular president with Vladimir Putin. Should have put it on president too, probably. These are over Alexei Navalny. He is the opposition leader to one of the most popular opposition groups and has been fighting against Putin's authoritarian regime. I don't see this one going anywhere, to be honest. It's not like India. Even though I think all of these kind of have some similarities, I think in Russia, you just can't really expect protests to go anywhere. They're willing to take things to another level. It's also, there's a bit of a weather issue with it being February in Russia. I don't know how much of an impact that has, but I would expect that it has some. Between all these, I think really the one that's critical for the American government to be involved in is in Myanmar. I think that is one where if we're going to be the leaders of democratic governments around the world, having one go an undemocratic way is not something that we should be supporting. We really need to figure out how we can protect the people and not put in sanctions that are going to enact starvation, basically, but still make sure that the military is aware that we are not going to accept this kind of overthrow. And in Russia, I think you need to support the protests as much as possible, right? It's shown that Russia can have an influence on us geopolitically. Anything you can do to take an adversary down a peg, got to take advantage of that. So time to go for the throat, I think, there. With all that, with jobs, we're still down 10 million jobs right now over where we were in February. So here's a quick chart kind of showing we've really started to taper off with the recovery. I think this is kind of where you've gotten out of, like, my layoff was right in here from in April and May. You had a huge just like fear out of big corporations, as well as some corporations just, I think, taking advantage of the situation that was presenting itself. And now you have a situation where I think this is more realistic for long-term unemployment without some sort of change. I think you could see a tick up with restaurants and stuff in certain states, but in states like Texas, right, there's no more reduction in unemployment. Like, Texas is basically fully open. Florida, a lot of states like that. So I think only in states like New York and California are you going to see a continued rebound. So I think this is kind of where this, 10 million jobs lost, 6 to 7% unemployment, I believe that's done here. Yeah, I think this is kind of where we're going to flatten off, but I could be wrong. I have been a lot of times. So you can also see long-term unemployment. This is just another indicator of how it's not really something that I think is going to recover super quickly. So that's what I got on that. Finally, we had Biden met with a group of bipartisan senators, governors, and business leaders this week, all independently, not at the same time, to advocate for a number of things. First, his COVID relief package, I think getting business leaders on board with a $15 minimum wage, as well as making sure the PPP program can be as directed as possible to those that need it, specifically small businesses. And then senators and governors, anything you can get them on board with, especially Republicans, I think it's just good. I think it's a good decision right now to bring them in early, to make them feel included. It's not patronizing. You're not patronizing them, but you really need to do what you can to bolster the power of any of the senators and governors that are honestly being rational at this stage. We're going to jump next into COVID. We just passed 470,000 deaths. We have an average of 3K a day. So I can show you that right now. Show you COVID death numbers for this year so far, just like we do every week. So we go these are all the states. I think this is a really interesting to look at. So you have the new cases. So cases have just fallen off a cliff, to be honest, since sometime in the middle of January, which is really, I think, like I said previously, indicative of holidays kind of tapering off. You really just had an insane decrease. We're down over 66% from our high a year ago, or I'm sorry, just a month ago now, right? Almost exactly a month. 66% reduction in a month is pretty insane. I also, looking at the 30-day chart, it doesn't look like we're tapering off quite yet, which I think is really good, right? You really would like to see the acceleration basically go unchanged, if not dip down more, but I think that's really unlikely when you're down around 100,000 cases a day. And then the other thing is with deaths, right? This has been really flat, and I think that's indicative of just this lag, right? I was looking into what the lag time looks like of the kind of total start to finish of what happens during a COVID infection. And you go from no symptoms to a death or recovery can be as long as, or even longer than 30 days, right? And so I think that if you look at where we started that downtrend, right, is just 30 days ago now, just in the second week of January, that you really are not going to see those effects until really starting now. So I think that hopefully it's really likely that in the next couple weeks, week or two, we will really see this number start to plummet. And if you look at kind of where we were in deaths at this point, right, you look all the way back, basically you would want to look at the beginning of December, right? In the beginning of December, we were down around 2,000, right? So that would already be a 33% drop. And I think it's likely that we'll go even lower than that based on the trajectory. So I'm really hoping that by the end of February, start of March, the weather will warm up, people will be able to go outside, at least down south. And I really think that there's a good chance that we really won't see another peak, at least nothing near like what we did, which I think is to be expected with what we're seeing as far as the vaccines. And that's the last piece of the deaths, right? As we get vaccinated, considering we're targeting, I think I read that 33% of the vaccines so far have gone to the targeted group. That's really an incredible improvement, right? So the last thing before we get into this, I want to talk about a lot of the discussions around how big we should go about the COVID relief package. The number, this is really morbid discussion, and I hate to talk about it this way, but we kind of have to. The cost of COVID is more than just jobs lost. It's more than the GDP, right? We have all those lives lost, and it's really gross, but there's a dollar value associated with those lives, right? And that dollar value is about $10 million a person. With 470,000 deaths so far, right? That's $4.5 trillion, right? We're going to be nearing $5 trillion in loss just on the deaths, right? So every preventable death is $10 million. So if you're talking about what we need to spend, right, when it comes to vaccine development, getting vaccines rolled out, any sort of PPE, communications, really anything, school safety, all those kind of things, the costs should really be evaluated in those terms, right? And what can we put in, not just those terms on top of the deaths, but even just cumulatively, right? You have both from a fiscal perspective and from a morality perspective. There's really I do not understand the idea that we need to go small, right? That we should do anything but everything we can do to make sure that we can reduce the death count as much as possible from this point forward, right? Nothing we can do, unfortunately, about going back. But all right, off of that. So let's get to the good news, right? We got vaccine rollout continues, right? We're up to 1.6 million a day. That's really, really incredible. That's up again from last time we talked. We're up to 48 million doses. Last week we were at 35 million doses. So that's really, really good. That's 12 million, almost 13 million just in 1 week. Right, so we're nearing 2 million a day, right? In the last week, 1.62 million based on what I was seeing. This is a little bit low, but that's really great. And I think that the fact that these numbers have come up is the only worrying sign to me, right? You can look around and look at these states, and there's really not that many states in 50%. Now, this is not going back. This is now the target has changed, right? So 50% is your target when you've distributed no vaccines so far, because you need to make sure that you have enough for everybody who has gotten a vaccine to be able to get their second one. Well, if you look at Texas, right, we have a certain number who have already had their second. For some reason, it's not showing, but there's a certain number who have already received their second dose, right? And so once people start receiving their second dose, you don't need to save for those individuals who've gotten their first shot, right? Now they've already gotten their second dose. So what I was calculating was that the target for Texas should probably be between 60 and 70%. So we're a little over that. And I think that's going to be true for most states. I think this is incredibly dangerous. This is ridiculously dangerous in my mind. And Dr. Fauci agrees that we do not have any data that says that issuing one dose and not having a second dose in the correct time window is a good idea. So I think that we should focus on making sure that we're saving a stockpile that can make sure that we can distribute the doses as needed. And I think that having states near 95%, 90%, 88%, that's just a bad idea, right? That's just not a good idea in general.